Women who declined a proposal, what happened? IMHO if you're ever proposing and not 100% sure that she is going to say yes, then you're doing it wrong. It shouldn't be a surprise. You're not asking someone to the prom. Edit, of course the how and when can be a surprise. And you might always have that little nagging doubt. But I stand by what I said. Of course the how and when can be a surprise. Bingo. Did this to my fiancée. She knew I was going to do it, but had no idea the how, the where, or the when. Drove her mad with the lead up, constantly throwing off false ideas too. It was fantastic, laughing face. Edit, I'm not Jim from The Office, I swear to Christ. I've never even watched it. Not me, but my mom. My mom's dad is a pretty successful businessman. My mom was working in some entry-level job in the same industry as my grandpa. The son of the owner of the company my mom worked for was a friend of hers. He asks her to hang out one night, not a date or anything. She had been dating my dad for years at the time, and ends up proposing to her because his dad was a successful businessman, and her dad was a successful businessman, so obviously they should get married. The words good breeding were thrown around. Future children were brought up. Obviously she said no. TLDR, guy proposes to my mom to genetically engineer super business babies. We've been dating for 3 years, having some trouble, and he wasn't interested in making any changes to work things out. He basically broke up with me. Turned out I was relieved, then found out he was really just bluffing to teach me a lesson. When he figured out that I was okay with breaking up, he proposed. Really pissed me off. I actually responded with, I have a date this weekend. I guess that was a little harsh, but don't propose out of desperation because you screwed up. We were 19 and in a crazy on-off relationship. At the time of the proposal, we were off, and in my head we were off for good. He came to my house and begged for me to come back, including a tear-filled proposal. I said no, got out of his truck and went back inside. A month later, he told me he was going to be a dad. He knocked someone up around the time he wanted me back. I said no, because we're not ready. We've been long distance for 3 years now, and although we love each other very much, he knows I won't marry him until we're both settled in together. Still, he asks almost 3 times a week, and it's become a bit of a laugh for us. He tries to sneak the question in without me noticing, and I add ridiculous conditions to my yes. I'm sure that when we decide to get married, he'll be too nervous to actually ask properly. He'll probably end up farting in bed and threatening to Dutch oven me if I don't say yes. It's not all bad in no world. He asked me which Indiana Jones movies I liked. I told him the first and third ones were good, but didn't care for Temple of Doom. This was before the 4th one came out. Right then and there he got down on one knee and proposed to me with the taco he was about to eat. 5 years later we're still dating. Edit, it was a hard shell standard issue Taco Bell taco. It was later eaten, but I don't remember by who. The whole thing was overshadowed when we walked outside and found the physics department assembling a trebuchet. The answer was someday. Being college students at the time and now working professionals, we're not in a good financial or career spot to get married yet. I said no, because I honestly was not prepared for such commitment so early and that fast. We have been seeing each other for about a year. I was 22, he was 24, and was always the super romantic kind of guy. Don't get me wrong, I love this, but he was always rushing things way too early and too soon. Luckily, he didn't plan a fancy proposal kind of thing, just surprise asked me at home, so I had to say no then. It didn't take long for us to break up eventually. I feel YA. I lived in a small rural town for a while, and I hated it, where it seemed as soon as someone was past 18 it was their God-given duty to get married ASAP. For months after I started dating my boyfriend, my best friend's sister asked us when the marriage was going to be, in all seriousness. I laughed and she was super insulted because apparently she was already engaged to a guy she'd met 2 months before. 2 years later, we're still not married, and just attended the marriage of his sister, who's known her now husband for less than a year. WTF? He was already married, offered to get divorced for me, and asked me multiple times with a ring. I have no idea why in the hell he kept asking. We were co-workers, and he saw me as a challenge, I think. So obviously, said no every time. When I was a little kid I didn't understand marriage. Obviously all I knew is you marry someone you love, and I loved my mom, so I would always ask her to marry me, and it made me so sad when she would say no. It was simply a ridiculous suggestion. We had been on and off, he hadn't been speaking to me for months until about a week before the proposal, and we hadn't discussed even dating again, and suddenly he was on one knee with an actual diamond ring. Not me personally, but one of my close girlfriends. She was dating this guy for 8 years, he proposed, she said no because he wasn't going anywhere with his life, not sure if true, I only know he's been working in a retail store for years and gained a lot of weight. Her saying no was just too hard to recover from, and they broke up. He's been doing a Facebook rampage about her, starting to work out and stuff, while she found someone who she seems to love dearly. See, I think 8 years is actually harsh from your friend's side. 8 years and then rejecting a marriage because of him not moving his life along? Surely that should have been a big deal earlier rather than at the time of proposal. We were 19. He proposed with a cubic zirconia ring and pretended to impress me and all of our friends by stating it was real. In general, he was a chronic liar and cheater. Very insecure and seemed to be the type who wanted to trap someone into marriage. I was much more insecure and passive then. He got married 2 months ago. Thank God I said no. It was too soon. We had only been dating for 9 months. I liked him, but wasn't sure that I was ready for marriage. Plus, I was too young. But we kept dating, and 6 months later moved in together. When he asked a year later, I said yes. Thank goodness he didn't make a production of the first, or second, proposal. He proposed while we were sitting on a park bench. Said we could move to Chicago because he has friends there. I said no because I am not going to marry some guy who just sat down on a park bench because he wants a green card and I'm a gringa. Walked away. Someone I had been dating for 2 months asked me to marry him once. He was needy and clingy and didn't understand that I was 23 and not even close to being ready, and I saw our relationship as a summer fling before leaving to finish school. He showed up at my apartment after the breakup. He stalked and called me until I said I would get a restraining order. Saw him in a restaurant a couple years ago. I could tell he wanted to say something to me, but I was happy he left. We were in 2 different places in our lives, and I never led him on or told him I loved him, it was just awkward. My brother's ex-fiancée said yes because she didn't want to say no. And then proceeded to break it off later saying she didn't want to say yes to begin with. He is with a much better girl now, so lose-win. He asked me after dating for only 5 months, and 2 of those months I had been out of state, so I certainly didn't feel like I knew him well enough to make that kind of commitment. We broke up right after that. About 9 months later, he was married to someone else. I think he just wanted to be married and it didn't matter to whom. My mum said no to my dad the first time he asked. Might have something to do with the fact that he called her up exceptionally drunk, his best mate was in the background egging him on do it. When Dad got back he had not a clue what he had done, so Mum went and bought herself a ring with Dad's credit card, gave it to him and then said, now do it properly. I had someone, a friend I'd never dated, propose to me after high school. I kind of laughed it off at first. Where I live, people don't get married that young. But he was devastated, and he kept calling me to ask if I'd changed my mind. I told him no, and I asked him to move on with his life, but he kept telling me he wouldn't take no for an answer. Unfortunately, I had to get a restraining order against him. We haven't spoken since. I still feel bad about it. I said no once because he proposed after around 4 months, drunkenly. It ended well. We ended up getting married about 8 months after that, after a long, heavy, sober discussion. Prior to that, I had turned down a proposal because, simply, I didn't want to marry him and think it's manipulative and cruel to propose marriage when you're not 100% on the same page. I loved him deeply, but I wanted to do me and move and be free during my 20s. It was bittersweet and I truly hope that he's happy. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done, but I'm so glad that I did. 5 or 6 years ago, in the grocery store, a little girl of 4 or 5 waddled up to me while I was looking over the pasta sauce, or whatever, and grabbed my leg in the cutest little bear hug ever. I was kind of surprised and looked down, and she said, "Will you marry me?" Her mother came hustling over and apologized. She was mortified. It made my night. Not to sound creepy, but I think about those two every now and again. I hope they're doing okay, wherever they are. We had been broken up for almost 3 months when he randomly asked me to marry him after a big fight we had. We were still friends and hanging out, kinda dating and not sure what we were doing. I said yes, then told him I had been seeing other people, we were still officially broken up, and things spiraled downwards from there, and we wound up splitting up for good. A year later, and we're hopefully developing a friendship again. I don't regret saying no to the guy he was then, but after a year apart we have both changed so much, for the better, that I probably wouldn't have said no if the proposal was a year later. I had an ambitious guy propose to me within 10 minutes of our first date. If that weren't awkward enough, the barista who was within earshot kept yelping, "Oh girl, say yes. Say yes." It really made me feel like a total tool when I chucked the juice at him and bolted out of the Starbucks. Even worse was that this guy and I had similar work networks, so I would see him frequently. His family was crazy and he was the most unmotivated yet motivated person I have ever met, constantly had plans to do things for himself, but would never actually follow through. There was never an official proposal, but we constantly talked about when we were getting married. We broke up, but I still love him. I dumped my boyfriend of 2 years because I found out he'd been fucking my best friend, now ex-best friend. 2 months later I went on a couple dates with a new guy and the ex found out, freaked out, and proposed. I said no. LOL. Showed up unannounced, months after our breakup when I had a new boyfriend. Tells me to check Facebook. Oh, you have a friend request. I check request. A fellow named Will You Marry Him has requested me as a friend. Secretly, he knows this is his account that was created to sneakily impress me with creativity. Looks at me. My face is red and I'm shaking my head no. He leaves and drives home. Home is 5 hours away in a blizzard. Sigh. He tried. We're still friends, somehow. Our lifestyles just didn't sync up. He was a laborer who worked far from my city that I attended university, plus had a thing for always being high. Rumors he had cheated on me. Not something I was used to or wanted to grow accustomed to as an everyday thing, for life. Twice, sort of. I had an ex tell me he wanted to leave his current girlfriend of several years, and elope with me. I said no. Then I had an SO propose to me on Valentine's Day while laying in bed. I told him no, and that we were too young, and still in college, so we weren't set up enough, but I knew that I didn't want to marry him. We broke up 6 months or so later. Both of these seemed very spontaneous, not planned or thought out though, so I dunno if it really counts. I once asked my best friend, an ex of 3 years, if she wanted to get married for insurance purposes. She had some medical issues that she could not afford, and my insurance was pretty decent. She decided not to, but it was offered and declined in good faith, and we're still very much friends. My grandpa proposed to my grandma on their 3rd date. Mind you, he was in the Air Force at the time and their dates were months apart. She said she turned him down the first time. I believe she turned him down one more time, and then accepted on the 3rd time. They were married for 56 years until he died in 2013. They did that lovey-dovey stuff all the time and were probably the closest thing to soulmates I've seen in real life. I had a guy propose to me at the gas station while I was getting gas, and we were going out only for 2 months, also I was young and still in college. Since his car broke down, I picked him up for our date, and at the end I stopped to get gas and he just randomly blurted it out. He did not have a ring, but he said if I say yes he would go buy a ring for me the next day. A wedding was just not in my plans at that time. Well, first off, we had only been dating a couple of months. That should have been a red flag. He put me on his bed and we sat together and talked for a while, and he lived in his father's government-subsidized housing project or something like that. He was also a drug user, a major one. He gave me the ring, and I obviously knew that he did not have the money for this ring, so I knew it had to be stolen from somewhere. He proposed to me on his bed, while his sister straightened her hair in the next room. I said no, and that she should probably take the ring back where he got it from. Oh, and did I mention this was in middle school? I was 16. We had been dating almost a year, and yeah, we were young, but had talked about a maybe one day kind of thing. I didn't think anything of the conversation until he got down on one knee in my living room while we were watching a movie, presented a purple butterfly ring, and asked me to marry him. I said no, came up with some lame not now, too young, maybe later kind of thing. We broke up shortly after. We were a couple months into the relationship, and he'd whittled down my confidence and self-assurance from, marriage isn't a high priority, give it a few years of solid relationship, and by the way, I'm never having children, to, you're marrying me next June, this is your engagement ring, we're having 7, ha ha ha, just kidding. Really? 2 children, biologically, we just have to wait for my divorce to finalize. The sticking point was I wouldn't be engaged officially or wear a ring till he was legally single. That's when I started to really understand that I was dating a douche. I fully admit, I'm a little slow sometimes. The start of his proposal was a confession of cheating. He called me at 3 a.m., drunk, on a night before I had a big exam and decided to tell me he just couldn't bear to cheat on me anymore. He then decided to lay out his life plan for us. I would move back home, I was in college, be a stay-at-home mom, and he would become a cop. I believe he actually used the phrase, barefoot and pregnant. He was mad when I said no. I was asked to leave and not come back, told I was horrible and cruel, etc. Yeah, what the hell? After he set all that up and proposed so publicly, you couldn't marry him for even a few years? Pretty selfish. That's why you don't make it a public thing. The person being asked, if they say no, is always going to look like the villain in that situation. They should have all the freedom to say no they want, and doing it around others may pressure them into saying yes when they don't want to. You don't want a marriage based on peer pressure, do you? You know you can go back whenever you want, right? Assuming this wasn't in the past few weeks, I can almost guarantee you that none of the staff remember, if they're even still there, and I highly doubt any of them would recognize you if they did. Of course the how and when can be a surprise. Bingo! Did this to my fiancée. She knew I was going to do it, but had no idea the how, the where, or the when. Drove her mad with the lead up, constantly throwing off false ideas too. It was fantastic, laughing face. Edit, I'm not Jim from The Office, I swear to Christ. I've never even watched it. I agree with this if it's an overt public proposal. But no reason you can't take a small gamble with a private one. What if you're 32, been dating a girl for 2 years, and if she's not ready for marriage by then you need to move on? Exactly, I'm in the camp of there needs to be an actual discussion about whether or not you want to spend the rest of your lives together and get married. Knowing that your SO is going to say yes when you pop the question doesn't mean it can't be a surprise, and knowing that your SO is going to ask you to marry them doesn't mean it's not romantic. I drunkenly won a stuffed animal in a Greek diner, jumped down 4 concrete steps, and asked a girl I met that night to marry me with the toy animal. She said no, surprising no one. Did I mention I was drunk? Like really drunk? Fun fact. I saw her years later in a local bar, and she told me if I asked again her answer might be different. She also made a Powerpuff Girl comment in reference to my now fiancé. A couple years ago, every week I'd go to this specific McDonald's with my friends after a night of drinking, and it would always be the same girl taking my order. Every time I finish my order and she asks, "Would that be all?" I'd answer with, "And your hand in marriage." I did that for about a year. A few years later, I meet this girl through a mutual friend. Pretty girl. Cold at first, but we hang out a few more times and start to get along really well, so one day I ask her out. She asks me, "What, not asking for my hand in marriage anymore?" I thought she looked familiar. He broke up with me very shortly afterward, citing my supposed inability to be a reasonable, rational person in light of my rejection of his unilateral propositions. I don't mean to be insulting or anything, but why didn't you break up with him right away? He basically broke up with me, turned out I was relieved, then found out he was really just bluffing to teach me a lesson. Oh lord, that sounds like something my ex-BF would do. He was always testing to see how much I loved him or always tried to catch me in lies. People who do shit like that are annoying. Glad you got out of that relationship. I almost never comment on this stuff, but I think it's important for you to realize this. This was not your fault. In the end, he made a choice. He chose to kill himself, not you. You cannot control anyone but yourself. Who's to say that if you had said yes, this wouldn't be a long-term trend in your relationship? If you don't do X, then I'll do Y to myself. So if you care about me, then you should do X. That's pretty much manipulation, and you deserve better. You deserve someone who will respect and love you independent of what you do. Had you said yes, he would still have continued drinking. Just because he was going to A doesn't mean that he was staying sober. Don't feel guilty for getting angry, it was a natural reaction. He was acting completely inappropriately and could have jeopardized your job. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. That guilt you're carrying is not your burden to bear. Say a prayer for him if you're spiritually inclined, and then please, for you and your peace of mind, let him go. It was never meant to be, and it wouldn't have saved him. You were smart enough at the time to realize it, so don't let the guilt make you second guess yourself. You did the right thing, and, unfortunately, love doesn't always fix things or save people. You weren't wrong to be angry at him, and he wasn't right to put it on you. His demons were solely his, and you were not obligated to help him fight them. Don't say stuff like that to yourself, either. His choices were driven by his actions, not yours. Your primary loyalty should always be to yourself. There's plenty of space in the number 2 slot, but you should always be in the number 1 spot. You are the only person that is 100% guaranteed to be with you until the moment you die, so treat yourself the best. If people in the number 2 slot make it to the end with you, more the better. Forgive yourself for loving yourself more than him. You were right to do so, IMO. You wanted to get up and out of the filth, he didn't. If you'd said yes, you would have been deciding to stay down in it, miserable, and then dead along with him. People are responsible for themselves. I feel YA. I lived in a small rural town for a while, and I hated it, where it seemed as soon as someone was past 18 it was their God-given duty to get married ASAP. For months after I started dating my boyfriend, my best friend's sister asked us when the marriage was going to be, in all seriousness. I laughed, and she was super insulted because apparently she was already engaged to a guy she'd met 2 months before. But 2 years later, we're still not married, and just attended the marriage of his sister, who's known her now husband for less than a year. WTF? I met my wife when she was 19 and I was 23. We married 9 months into the relationship. This year it's going to be 10 years anniversary. Sometimes it works out. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.